Risks of Decentralized Finance Regulations.
Hey everyone, this is Gordon Einstein. I'm very happy today to moderate a fantastic panel as part of the AIBC Europe conference, my favorite conference, dare I say, run by the best people on the planet. And our topic today is risks of decentralized finance regulations. Before we get into that, I think we're going to allow our guests, our panelists, to really briefly introduce themselves. We got a stellar crew here. Of course, they're spread mostly all over the world. I can't actually completely say that, but North America and Europe, let's say. So I am going to start clockwise based on what I can see on the screen. Kenneth, be so kind as to introduce yourself, and we'll just take it from there.
Well, thank you, Gordon. I'm Kenneth Farrugia. I'm delighted to be here at this conference and to share views and thoughts with you on this particular interesting topic. My background, I'm a banker by profession. I've been working with Bank of Valletta for 35 years. Sit on the executive committee of the group, and I'm responsible for the business of the bank.
Very interesting. And Mark, please.
Mark Mueller-Eberstein, close to Seattle, just north of Microsoft, recovering Microsoft after 10 years, running a consulting business, being part of the angel investor community here that Bill Gates' father founded, like the Angel of Alliance, traditional angel investment, and in the blockchain space since 2014. I'm a member of the Governors, IoT and Advisory Council, and we work a lot with policy and trying on one side and helping entrepreneurs and startups on the other side with finances and connections.
So you're not the Microsoft guy that just got away with $10 million worth of Bitcoin and had those legal issues, right? That's someone else?
No, I wish. Nothing about the 10 million, but definitely no legal issues, and I definitely want to make sure that stays that way. So we're super up and clean and clear with anything we do.
Just checking. I guess, if you were the guy who took it, I'd say you need to buy dinner next time I'm allowed outside the house.
Well, I'll buy you coffee anyway. How's that? It has nothing to do with that.
Sure. I accept. Kyle, please.
Perfect. Hi, everyone. My name is Scerri. I'm a lawyer by profession. I'm here representing CSB Group, a regulated advisor and compliance advisor therein. I've been advising in the financial services blockchain technology space since early 2017, and I can't wait to discuss today's topics with a very talented panel and moderator, of course.
Oh, thank you. Just real quick, Gordon Einstein, I think I mentioned, I'm an attorney. I practice solely cryptocurrency and blockchain law. I'm located in Los Angeles, California, apparently permanently. Prior to then, well, actually I have an international practice, but hopefully we'll get back to the days where I actually go see my clients in person as opposed to over Zoom. So let's dive right in. Obviously, the finance and financial markets are very regulated for very good reason. I think a lot of this sprung out of the Great Depression and widespread belief, which has a pretty firm basis, that it was the crash of the financial markets that led to the Depression and led to World War II. And since then, in the US, Europe, every jurisdiction that's developed a sophisticated economy, they've been active in regulating this area, especially in terms of protecting sort of the widow and orphan small investor. Decentralized finance is fascinating because it maybe is a way of democratizing away from that control or the overreach of that control, but it's like Prometheus's fire. It can light the room or it can burn your fingers. It's an interesting question about how to handle this. So I think we'll kind of do a rotation geographically. I think I'll approach it that way. Let me throw this to Kenneth and to Kyle first. What's your take on this field in general, and what is Malta doing with DeFi, specifically along the regulation track?
Okay, let's kick off.
Start talking.
Let's go in clockwise manner, as you started initially with the roundup. No, intrinsically, you're right, and you made a very valid point insofar that the industry has gone from a deregulated environment to a re-regulated environment. Undoubtedly, the financial crisis brought about with it a significant number of considerations by regulators to strongly regulate operators and license holders. And clearly the entry, in particularly from a Malta perspective, the entry of blockchain into the space and our trust, we were one of the countries that really led the development of a regulatory and legal framework to regulate virtual financial assets and technology providers at the same time, put the framework together. I think, however, insofar as the bankability of this business, and particularly from a regulatory perspective, given the concerns around virtual financial assets, that somehow got intertwined with blockchain technology per se. I think that clouded the issues. And in fact, we saw that many banks were really reluctant to bank blockchain operators and particularly, operators of virtual financial assets. And the reason behind it, if you look at what happened in Europe in these last 10 years, regulators were heavily fining banks, running into, billions of euros of fines for weaknesses in their AML processes and procedures. So when operators in the blockchain space came with this new technology with virtual financial assets, the banks were barely coping with managing traditional currencies, particularly from an AML control point of view. So you come with virtual financial assets, and the banks were saying, I'm getting my house in order to ensure that I have the right regulations, the right oversight for transactions in traditional currencies. There isn't pan-European, from a European perspective, regulating such assets. So the banks were really unwilling to service this sector. Undoubtedly, okay.
Sorry, let me break it in. Let me ask you a question, because Bank of Valletta is well known, and I've had the pleasure of meeting with several people there. To what extent does the banking system touch not necessarily blockchain finance, but decentralized finance? Is it two different lanes, or are they crossing over somehow?
No, I think they do cross over to a degree. And I think the banks were not making any distinction whatsoever between the two. Intrinsically, I think the banks really put a halt to banking operators in this particular space. And this was not only happening in Malta. I met a number of international operators that came to Malta to understand the legal framework here and the opportunities that they could leverage through the framework. But undoubtedly, I think common theme to all these operators was the inability for them to bank the business, right? They were really struggling to bank the business. And I think the absence of a pan-European drive by blockchain operators, by even operators of virtual financial assets, in making representations at European Commission level, with bankers associations in particular, that outreach program was really missing, right, to demystify perceptions as well, because most of the views of compliance officers and risk officers was to a degree, driven by perceptions rather than reality and fact.
Interesting. Kyle, give us your Malta lawyer perspective.
Yeah, so to build upon basically what Kenneth is saying, I think from a Malta point of view, we initially were main drivers in the blockchain space. And I think that clouded many people's judgment, thinking that DeFi is just blockchain-based type of finance, so to speak. And I think now in Malta, we're seeing a regulatory approach where we're embracing DeFi in a more general sense. So we're taking more traditional concepts of financial services. We're tackling the real issues and the real innovation behind DeFi at the end of the day, and trying to, so to speak, widen the scope of our legal, so to speak, view on these issues. So the Malta Financial Services Authority is pretty proactive in this respect. It issues guidance papers on security tokens, for example. It issues new initiatives such as sandbox regimes as well. So we're seeing a little bit of a drive towards expanding the concept beyond blockchain. However, obviously, law is technology neutral, but it is not necessarily technology friendly. So sometimes you find bottlenecks, legal bottlenecks, to make things happen. So I think
let me interrupt you 1 second. That was a very interesting distinction you just made, and I want to kind of capture it. It's technologically neutral, but not necessarily technology friendly. That's highly quotable. Can you dig that one a little bit?
Yeah, sure. So technology neutral, effectively, every law is drafted in a manner which specifically, or rather most laws are drafted in a manner which specifically do not make a distinction between technology A or technology B. However, in practice, when a new technology comes about, let's say decentralized technology in general terms, we find certain problems of applying that technology to a traditional concept. Again, I will use the concept of security tokens. So we have an entire framework regulating securities, transferable securities, from issuance to trading. However, if you had to integrate decentralized technology in the form of a security token, you'll find that the laws which we have create a bottleneck and an impossibility to really operate. So
an impossibility.
An impossibility to operate. So I'm referring to the EU aspect of it all. So from an issuance point of view, for example, then it's fine. Then we can issue security tokens based on our prospectus directive. However, when it comes to trading, you need a central securities depository. Now, how will a central securities depository go hand in hand with a decentralized type of technology? It's a little bit of an oxymoron, and it's a legal bottleneck, effectively. So I think we're getting there, but we're still far off.
And I know Malta, I've had the pleasure of being there several times. I know it was making a big regulatory push in 2017 and 2018. I think my impression is there were some issues, involving going back and forth with the EU and having the virtual agents sort of getting all on board in 2019. And then, of course, COVID hit. But I'm under the impression that the big regulatory push took place before the explosion of DeFi specifically. Is that correct? And if so, has there been recent legislation updating specifically for decentralized finance?
Okay. Well, a regulatory push focused on blockchain technology. I wouldn't say it happened before the explosion of DeFi as a concept, but more it focused on blockchain technology. Now, recently, we haven't seen legislative updates. We've seen the Malta Financial Services Authority issue guidance papers, issue, so to speak, concepts such as sandboxes. And I think that is a stepping stone towards things which are yet to come. So we're getting there, so to speak. We're slowly getting there from a virtual financial asset perspective as well. So the entire framework is slowly coming to fruition, and operators are slowly moving towards being licensed and towards fully fledged operations in Malta. And at the same time, I think the authority is laying the foundation for DeFi more than blockchain. So maybe to clarify as well, I think that is what is happening.
Interesting. So I want to bring Mark into the conversation. Mark, you have a fascinating background. I mean, Microsoft, Angel. I think I checked first time I think talking in depth. I looked at you at LinkedIn. You've been around the block. Can you bring us your perspective on the DeFi market in general, and specifically the interface? I mean, you can bring, I guess, an American angle or even a German American angle to the interface between the regulatory structures and this new field.
Absolutely happy to do this. And yes, my heart, as I've been visiting Malta many times, so it's good to be kind of back as we can during these days. Looking at it from a global perspective, regulatory clarity is extremely important to helping innovation. So let's start. The traditional finance system works great for about 20% of the global population. 80% do not have access to finance, to insurance, to even a checking account or a savings account today. And the potential that DeFi brings to bringing huge exponential growth of productivity improvements for huge parts of the human population, I think is tremendous. We have worked with MakerDAO for many, many years when we start to see what was called DeFi today, we see that potential for a long, long time. And of course, the explosion and what happened in DeFi over the last 12 months definitely showed what's possible on an innovation side. Having said that, even the traditional financial side, we all know there's a lot of things going on in the traditional banking system that is not passing muster. There's a lot of things happening with fiat money that is not clear and clean. And I think, Gordon, when you started, for all of us as investors, but even as entrepreneurs, what we want to make sure is we want to be compliant. We want to be regulatory. We want to be compliant with the regulations and best practices. So for us innovators and for our innovators, it's important to have clarity, that clear guidance to follow, how to make sure that technology innovation, the customer value can be generated in a way that is compliant and clean. I applaud countries like Malta, I applaud countries like Singapore that are providing that guidance to customers. It is detrimental for the innovation climate in an area if that clarity is missing. Or, Gordon, I'm sorry to pick on the lawyers here, if a huge amount of the limited startup budget has to go to lawyers to figuring out how maybe to be compliant, while on the other side, the competitive innovators just fill out a couple of papers, making sure they follow steps 1 to 10, and they can move ahead with their innovation.
Hey, so since you threw that at me, I'll pick it up. I actually stopped practicing law for a solid 15 years, and about 5 years ago went back into law because of Bitcoin and blockchain, and chose that to be my sole practice area. And my goal in life is to work myself out of a job. In other words, I want to port law. I want to make contracts actually smart and actually make them contracts. Because you want to talk about oxymorons, I'm not sure they're either right now.
That's why you and I get along so well.
Beautiful. I love it. You want me out of a job also. Thanks. I'll tell my wife. So, Mark, let me stay with you for a minute. So it's interesting you mentioned MakerDAO, and I think we're all aware of what's going on with SushiSwap and Uniswap and what sometimes looks like an exit scam, but sometimes isn't. I question, not like in a hostile way, but in an intellectual way, whether or not DeFi is even physically subject to regulation, because if it's truly decentralized, and it's atomic and it's peer-to-peer, and whoever created it has now taken a step back, and you can kind of see this with SushiSwap and some others. If they've taken a step back and said, look, yes, I let the cat out of the bag, but now the cat is roaming free, who's getting regulated and how, and what are the touch points? So, Mark, let me stay on you for that one, and then we'll kind of reopen it.
I think, yes, we are in interesting times where what's legal and what's right might not necessarily be a completely overlap. As you said, I think in a decentralized world, it is, where do you start to do regulation? I think Kenneth mentioned it, it's probably on the on-ramp and the off-ramp side that's regulated. People physically need to be somewhere, so the operation of whatever happens falls probably under some regulation. Again, I'm not a lawyer, I'm not even playing one on TV. But I think those are the points of where regulation can come in. And as you said, it's unfortunate that in the blockchain space, we have not only seen, like, we see a lot of well-meaning entrepreneurs that are not capable of building something. So as an investor, it's really important to figure out the right teams. In the blockchain space, we have seen it in 2018, 17, 18. We're seeing it now with DeFi. There's just too many elements that are going out for fast money. And if it's not mentioning sushi, pickle, pizza, whatever, hot dogs specifically, but it's just has been, I think, very clear that elements that should be not trusted with money in general have been given access to funds, and that's just not the right thing, I think.
Got it. Now I got a little voice in my ear telling me we're on the final minutes. This has flown by. Let me throw this back to the Malta group. I'll reframe the question I threw at Mark, which is, given true decentralization and the idea that maybe something gets launched, but then it's free or goes underneath a DAO, which of course should be centralized also, can this be regulated? Like, what do you do, and what is Malta doing? So answer that question in 30 seconds. No,
look, I think from taking the investor end, right into perspective, clearly there must be some form of regulation on operators, right? You cannot really leave it in the hands of operators to do what they feel or give an interpretation to laws and regulations without having a supervisory oversight arrangement in place, right? And I think the challenge for regulators is really understanding how this technology is deployed. And I give a very practical example, the entry of robo-advisory in asset management. So, if you look at regulations like MiFID II, it really spells out how you can give advice to customers, what are the requirements, suitability assessments and whatnot, right? Now enter robo-advisory, right? With AI within that, right? Which automatically manages portfolios. They can't understand that, right? Because they're not technology experts. Right? And this is where even the regulators need to upskill their capabilities insofar as understanding technology and getting the right people behind it. And I think this is what Malta cannily did in this space, where it set up a dedicated...
Let me talk to you, because I'm on my 30-second countdown. Okay. I got the little voice in my ear. Kyle, you're going to get the last word other than my last word. Go.
Okay, so I think, as well, echoing what Kenneth is saying, ultimately, this idea of having someone not responsible in a pure, real, decentralized world, I don't think it can work in the real world. So we need to make a distinction between what we advocate in favor of from a decentralized point of view, as opposed to what can really happen. So somebody has always to be in a position to take the blame. Now, I think what Malta has done, and what I think Malta will do as well, is that in a very intelligent way, embrace technology, embrace decentralization. However, do keep people accountable. It is critical that legally investors, consumers, have a point of recourse, and a point of recourse which is realistic and attainable and also affordable. So ultimately, I think we need to depart from certain traditional concepts in order to really bring DeFi to the widower, as you rightly mentioned at the start of the panel discussion. However, ultimately, if it becomes too complex, we're losing the plot and we're losing the whole concept as to why this started in the first place. So I think ultimately, going forward, true full decentralization is not possible. However, embracing decentralization within our known systems, which have a lot of good as well, is something which will happen ultimately.
Fair enough. I think we're going to end on that. It's been great. It's been fast. But I want to thank our esteemed guests. I hope to see you in person in Malta. I hope to actually see Seattle at some point. So God bless you all, and we'll reconvene shortly and see where DeFi goes. So thank you, everyone.
Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.